Hi and welcome to this video in the Understanding Concepts series in MRDCL. In this video we're going to look at special texts and label controls. Now I'm not going to use example scripts for this, so you'll find no help files for this particular video. What we're going to do is run through all the label controls and just introduce you to where you get the special texts and how you can replace them. So if you go into the help, which is up here on the menu, and pick command language help, what I do to find the special text is locate A, and that will take me to the first special text. And if we expand that, you'll see over here that you'll get a description of what all those special texts mean. Now they run from A to Z pretty much, with most letters present. You'll find that some just get used, a bit like format options, they differ in how you use them. Some you just use with the character itself, so A, for example, is just enclosed in less than and greater than. Other ones take a value, and one or two actually have slightly more complex codes that go with them in their use. So we're going to run through all of these so you can understand what they do, and then we'll take a briefer look at the special text and how you use these. So label controls, first of all, work on labels, and most of them apply to different sets of labels, but it is worth reading the help to see where they apply, because they don't apply to everything. Some only work on headers, some only work with mean scores perhaps, or something like that. So there's different rules and different application for each of these options. And we can't do all that in this session, so you can find out more by reading the help in here. But I'm going to take you through each one now. So let's start with less than A, greater than. We call this typically boxed A in MRDCL, so to speak, but so I'll refer to that regularly through this video. But less than A, greater than is boxed A, into what we reference it as. And this one's quite a rare one. What this will do is tell MRDCL where to print the mean scores. Now typically you don't have a boxed A, so it just prints them at the bottom of the table, but let's say you wanted to put them before the not stated category, so the not stated row of a table got left at the bottom. You could use a boxed A to tell it to print statistics here, and then it would put them in that particular row of the table or after that particular row of the table, rather than at the bottom as they do now. Alright, on to the next letter, B. B gets used again in isolation, so it's just less than B, greater than, box B, and that tells MRDCL to re-percentage all subsequent rows or columns on that particular row or column. Now of course it only works when on rows when you're percenting vertically, and it only works on columns when you're percenting horizontally, but it will rebase your tables. Now when you're using this option, I always think it's a good idea to put an extra row in that makes it very clear, or a piece of text that tells the user that it's changing the base halfway through a table, otherwise it can be confusing. So for example, if you've got a yes/no question and you want to put in the same table the reason they say yes/no, and rebase the table on the people that say yes, because that's the filter for the second half of the table, what I would typically do is have code 1 for yes, code 2 for no, then I'll have code 1 again for the base, and then I'd have code 1 again so I can show that base, because then I can suppress it on one of those two choices. And then less than B, greater than, or box B, would re-percentage the second half of the table. Personally, I don't particularly like the option because I think it can be confusing for users of the table. They don't always realise that the base has changed. But that's what it does. It re-percentages the table from that point onwards. C is the next option. That produces a count. So if you want, some people like to have checks on their tables to check they add to 100%, or to see what the percentages add to on a multiple response question. So if you add an extra bit to your variable with an F comma on the end, that will have a false row in it, and if you put boxed C on that, that will give you a count of all of the rows above. Now you can exclude certain rows if you wanted to. So if you wanted to count excluding the not stated, for example, you could put a less than Q or a box Q on the not stated row, and it would then tell you what percentage of people had given a positive answer. On multiple response questions, it would just add everything up, and you might get 250%, which would mean that there were an average of 2.5 answers for the sample, for example. On to D. Now D does take a value, so D takes a numeric value after it. So always when you use D, you would expect a number after that. And what that changes is the number of decimal places. I quite often use that one, for example, when I want to change the mean score to have perhaps 3 decimal places for some reason. I might say percentage AVG equals, quote, mean score less than D3 greater than, quote, comma, and that would give me 3 decimal places for the mean score. And you can use it on odd rows or odd columns to set the decimal places. On we go to E. Now E is used when you've got a set of tables where you're using NDIS to suppress the distribution and just get a whole stack of mean score tables. If you just produce that table plus T underneath each other, you would just get the word mean score, mean score, mean score, mean score for each of the rows. But if you've got a header, you could put the boxed E on the header row before the backslash, and it would use the header as the mean score label. So it's a way of avoiding using the percentage AVG special label, because you can get it to use the header as the text for the mean score when you suppress all of the rows, except of course show the mean score when you've got a mean score type table. So that's E. F is a local format option. So F will only take place for a particular row or column of the table. You should use it with care, especially when the table is likely to overflow. So it's not something I recommend putting on rows or columns. It's better to use K and T, which we will come to in a while, where you set a local format. Now G is a much more complex one to use. We're not going to cover that in great detail here because it is an option that people use that's quite complex. Basically, G takes a value and then one of the letters, as you'll see specified down here, B, E, P or N. Now the most common thing that you do is that if you want to rank, let's say in a table you want the highest ranking answer to go to the top and the lowest to go to the bottom, and obviously all the ones in between to rank, but perhaps you want to leave others and not stated at the bottom, you would put G1B, so G for the label control, 1 to indicate that's the group we're ranking, and B to say it begins. You'll put G1B on the first row, you would put G1E on the row before the others, so that then it would rank everything from the first row to the row one above the others, and it would leave others and not stated at the bottom of the table. Now that's a common use of G1E. Now if you want to get more complex than that, you can do ranking within headers. So if you've got something like a code frame where you've got subtitles, you might find that you want to have subtotals and then rank the codes within each of those subtotals. So you've got a second group which you might call G2B and G2E. Now when you've got something like that, you probably want to make sure that you're not just ranking those but append them to the heading they're going with, and that's where you carry along with G1P and G1N. Now that's quite a complex topic and is probably best left to another session to explain that in more detail. We move on to H. Now H is one that takes a value, and that's when you've got perhaps something like a range. If you've got 5 to 10 people, $5 to $10 going into a bit in a variable, you might want to set the lower value to 5 and the higher to 10, so that when medians or even quantiles are produced, it will take the lower and higher value of 5, so less than L5, greater than, less than H 10 greater than. So boxed L5 and boxed H10 would be what you would want. Next we come to I, and that inserts, or indents rather, all the rows, text and columns by the value you put. I don't particularly like that. It only applies to text tables, but it insets the whole table, or indents the whole table. J is a complex area. On titles, JC, which we'll come to down here, is a useful one because that justifies and centres it in the middle of the table. And footnote, that works on quite well. JL and JR do a similar thing. J plus is slightly more complex in that it will merge it with the previous line. Now, if you get that wrong, you can start to get things going on top of each other. But I'm thinking here perhaps a footnote where you perhaps want to left justify your company name, but you want to right justify on the same line the date, for example. So you might there have open up quotes for a footnote, for a percentage JF, and you might have the company name JL, box JL, star to throw a new line, but then use J plus to put it back on the line above, have the date, but JR that, so it right justifies the date, and that would work fine. L is the partner of H, which we mentioned just now, so that's just the lower value. ML's a way of setting a margin so that everything indents. It only works on text tables, and you can use that to the right as well. N just sets the number of spaces. So if you put less than 5, it just sets 5 blank spaces if you want 5 blank spaces in your text. O is a way of making different rows overflow when the table overflows in a text table. It has no effect in a CSV file, but you can choose up to 5 rows which you label O1, O2, O3, O4, O5 that will continue when you have an overflow table. By default, just the total row overflows, but if you want some other rows to overflow with it, O1, O2 would take 2 other rows with it on those particular rows. P just throws a new page, so normally MRDCL decides when to throw a new page both vertically and horizontally. If you want to control that, less than P greater than will false it at that particular point. Q was the label control that didn't include rows in a count or a less than C label control. R means that only raw numbers appear in that particular row or column, so it would suppress percentages. In other words, you'd just get raw numbers, and that just takes the value less than R greater than. S means suppress the row altogether. Now it seems a bit strange to have a variable where you suppress the row altogether, but you might do that where you have a variable, perhaps when you're tabulating it vertically you want to see the row, but if you're tabulating it horizontally you want to suppress it. So you might have a V label that shows it, but when it's horizontally tabulated you might want to suppress it. So don't know comes to mind there. T equals means that you only want to, you use it like a format option, but it means that you want to use it in a banner for just these particular options to do special calculations in the banner. There's an example here that shows that, and indeed in the mean score video this is discussed in a bit more detail. U will underline the particular text that you have there, although you can enclose a piece of text in the underlined characters and it will underline everything in between. Boxed X, that will do the opposite, if you like, of boxed R. That will suppress the figures and only show the percentages. Now we come to boxed R. That will print the figures in place the percentages in that particular column. So it's a way of mixing what you show in a particular table. Format HAL is an alternative way of doing that. Box Z means suppress the row or column if it happens to be 0. So it will appear if there's 5% in there, or even 0.5% or 0.25%, it will show it, but if it's 0, it'll just take that row out. Alright, so let's gone through the label controls fairly quickly. Now we move on to special text. If you type special in here, you'll get special text. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I am going to just talk you through some of the ideas and concepts here. So here's a list of all the specials. They pretty much tie up with format options, or they stand for something that's quite intelligible. So if you wanted to change the mean score for the format AVG, or the text rather, you can use the special percentage AVG, and you can change the word mean score to average, or to just the word mean, or any other piece of text that you want. You can include label controls in that, so you could put D1 or D2 in that, and that would be additional to the renaming of the text, or you could just repeat the text mean score and reset the decimal places. And then you could find other options down here, like a median. The text for median is the word medians. If you wanted it to be just the word median, you could have a percentage med that said median. So most of these you can find by, and it means that you can change the text. Many of them only work on text tables, some don't. And there's things here like right down to the detail, like the word page number comes out as page ampersand pag. If you wanted to change that into a different language, for example, you could change the word page to a different language and then pull in the page number, write justify, and put it J plus it onto the previous line. Some of these get quite complex to use and need a bit of tweaking to just get working as you want to. And some of these you probably will never change, but things like the JH are quite useful ones for having a job header. JF for a footnote's another one, and you do get things like JHT, which is the heading that comes out in the table of contents. So you can have a different heading in the table of contents. But really, you need to work through those on your own. You'll see there's quite a long list of them, which I don't think it's good value to go through in a video. But I think probably if you look through those, most of those will make good sense. So that completes this video on label controls and special text. I hope it was useful to you, and I hope you'll find more videos in the MRDCL Understanding Concepts series useful to you as well. Thank you.